Turn in your Bible, if you will, to Matthew chapter 27. Woke up this morning and it was a beautiful day. Even though it is a beautiful day, and I'm thankful for that, and I'm glad to be here. The lesson we're going to study this morning is not what you'd call a beautiful lesson. We're going to talk about the pain that the Lord endured at the cross. And there's something about this in the book of Matthew. As many times as I've read this, it really didn't come out to me so much as I read it this time when I was preparing this lesson. I want to show you something about that pain that maybe we don't think about as much. We often think of that physical pain, and we'll talk about that, but there's something else going on here. Now let me just read the account first. The title of the lesson is Sitting Down, They Watched Him There. Now watch for that as we go through this account. Matthew 27, beginning in verse 26. Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall, and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him, and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spat upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe from off him, and put on his own raiment, and led him away to crucify him. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled to bear his cross. And when they were coming to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall. And when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. And they crucified him, and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And sitting down, they watched him there. Now let me stop there just a minute. That might be the most heartless passage in all the Bible. Why would anyone want to watch something like that? Now there were those thieves being crucified. I don't know what all the damage they had done, but I wouldn't have wanted to watch it, would you? I don't even like to see an animal suffer, some beast, and just watch them go through agony into the death. I don't want to see it. I don't understand the attraction to this, and I'm not trying to pretend I'm better than anybody else, but I just can't understand why some people go and watch some movies that the whole idea of the movie is to show how awful a thing can be and how terrible someone can suffer. I don't want to watch that. And yet here we have the Son of God who is innocent. Young man. He's about 33 years old, roundabout. We don't have to know exactly, but a young man in his prime. And they're watching this. It just makes you wonder, what have we become? We read there that that darkness came upon the earth. We're going to read about that, and that's been interpreted as God. He couldn't watch it. He turns away and couldn't watch it. Now, I don't know if that's really why the darkness was there. That's what somebody says about it. But think of that. And here we're created in the image of God. And among those were those that said, well, let's just sit down and watch this. Well, I think of things like that. When I think about that song we sing, sometimes it causes me to tremble. Let's go on and read what happens. And set up over his head this accusation written, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Then were there two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand, another on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, "Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise also the chief priests, mocking him, with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we'll believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God." The thieves also, which were crucified with him, cast the same in his teeth. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." And that is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, "This man calleth for Elias." And straightway one of them ran and took a scourge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. The rest said, "Let us see whether Elias will come to save him." Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. I want to press upon you the agony that Jesus went through. And most of the time when we talk about this, we talk about his physical agony. And Matthew does too. But Matthew doesn't get into a lot of gory details about it. Now, I've heard preachers stand up and they really like to almost enjoy getting into the details. It just kind of make me squeamish while they hear them talk. They'll come up with medical reports and explain, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Perhaps it's good for us to think of that. Matthew does describe some of the physical agony Jesus went through without a lot of detail. Here's what Matthew says physically in regarding to his agony. They spit in his face and buffeted him. You know what buffeted means? That means they pushed him and shoved him around and poked him and jabbed at him. And it says others smote him with the palms of their hands. And then he was scourged. Now remember that word, scourged. They planted a crown of thorns and they put it on his head. You remember Don Iverson talking about the thorns in India, those long, sharp thorns that just like razors? He said we didn't have any thorns like that here. Well, he needs to get out in my thicket and see some of these calorie pears, that grow with these awful long thorns. They'll stick you and leave a little piece of the thorn in there, when they stick you. So he wasn't thinking of those. It wasn't rosebush thorns, that's true. But these would be long, ugly thorns. And they put it on his tender head. And then it says they spat on him and took a reed and smote him on the head. And if the thorns weren't hurting him, they'd sure hurt when a reed smote on him, wouldn't they? And they gave him vinegar to drink mingled with gall. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? Now, that might have been something to dull his senses. This acidic vinegar and whatever this gall was, and some have suggested, and I don't know that they know this, but something they would give them so they could sup and drink and somehow deaden their senses somewhat as they went through this physical agony. Maybe so. But Jesus wouldn't take it when they gave it to him. He tasted it, saw what it was, and he would not drink. And they crucified him. Now the two words to look at here are scourged and crucified. And when you go into the meaning and descriptions of what it meant to be scourged and what it meant to be crucified, then we really understand the pain, physical pain that Jesus had to endure. But Matthew doesn't go into those details. This is sufficient for Matthew's purpose to describe his physical agony in these limited terms. But there's another agony that Jesus endured that maybe we haven't given as much thought to. It's the kind of agony that we sometimes have, at least in some I know we've all been hurt physically, and we hate to think about being physically hurt. But there's emotional agony. There's a mental agony. In the bulletin, I called it a spiritual agony, because that part of our mind that is mental and emotional is a part of us that is made in the image of God. And I know that some of you already know that that's worse than physical agony, isn't it? You can go through such emotional pain. Give me the physical pain, but this emotional pain, how difficult it is to bear. And I want us to think about the emotional pain Jesus went through as they ridiculed him and shamed him. And that is really where Matthew spends most of his time in describing the agony of Christ. Here's what he says. Earlier in the chapter, in the previous chapter, the chief priest cries out, "He hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, ye have heard his blasphemy." And Jesus no more did that. He did not blaspheme. Put yourself in that. How would you like to be so falsely accused, so obviously, falsely accused by the one that's supposed to be making sure this is a fair trial, and them shouting that out at you? It hurt, wouldn't it? I don't like people to accuse me of things that I have not done, or to assume the worst about me and put things out about me that I haven't done or said. And that's what they did. Now, go on, Matthew 26, again, 67 through 68. They did spit in his face. Now, have you ever had anybody spit in your face? I cannot imagine a greater insult than someone to just come up and spit in my face. And I tell you, I'm a man of like passions as you are, and I don't want to think about how I might react to that, because you just don't do that to people. I've heard people saying they were somebody could just spit in their face or spit on their grave or something like that. I associate this with John 3:16, which says, "God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and they spat in his face." Well, it makes you tremble, doesn't it? All right. "And buffeted him. Others smote him with the palm of his hands, saying, Prophesy unto us, thou Christ. Who is he that smote thee?" It doesn't tell us here in Matthew, but in the other accounts, they blindfolded him. They put up something. He couldn't see who was hitting him, and they're smiting him. Prophesy. Okay, who's hit thee? Yeah, can't you see how they're just making fun of him? I couldn't. Have you ever seen bullies pick on little fellas? It's like they're doing that. Just antagonizing and making this as difficult to bear as it could possibly be. See, they didn't realize he did know. He did know. He was God. He knew. They didn't think he knew. They were having fun with this. And then they said, "Release Barabbas." The governor answered and said to them, "Whether the twain shall I release unto you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Well, Barabbas was, everyone knew that Barabbas was a thief and a murderer, a notable prisoner, an insurrectionist. And they're saying, Barabbas! They'd rather have Barabbas released than Jesus. And Pilate said unto them, what shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? And they all said unto him, let him be crucified. And the governor said, why? What evil hath he done? But they cried the more, saying, let him be crucified. How would you like them if they were saying that about you? And then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus to the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. Now, there could have been 100 soldiers here. A band is quite a large number of soldiers. So they're all gathered around him. I think about somebody surrounded by hyenas or wolves or something, and they're going to torture him and pester him. They stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe, and when they had planted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. Now, reeds is just an old flimsy stalk. You know, they're dressing him up like a fool, dressing him like a clown, and they're having fun as they put him through this agony. It says they put a reed in his hand and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And then here again, and they spit on him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the robe off him and put on his own raiment and led him away to crucify him. And then on the cross, they set up over his head this accusation written, This is Jesus, King of the Jews. See, they're mocking him when they do that. Then there were two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand, another on the left, and they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads. Now, I've probably done that. I've seen people do something that was just so absurd that I just shake my head. And you've probably done that. But I hadn't done that to a man suffering like this. And here he is, and they're walking by, and I bet it's exaggerated. Don't you just walk up and catch around and just shake their heads like, what a fool this man has been, wagging their heads and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Doesn't that remind you of something? You remember the devil? When he appeared unto Jesus in the wilderness, If thou be the Son of God, command these stones to be made bread. If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself off on the pinnacle of this temple. And now here he is enduring the agony of the cross. The devil's gotten into these folks. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also, the chief priest, mocking him with the scribes and the elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. Well, I don't believe that. You know, they were saying that. What if he had? What if he said, all right, and came down on the cross? Well, I'm sure Mount Calvary would have cleared out real quick. And I don't think they would believe him. He had already given them so much evidence. And they wouldn't believe. He rose from the dead and they didn't believe him. They weren't going to believe if he came down from that cross. They were just saying that. And it wasn't so. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now. Have you ever had someone challenge your faith like that? Well, you're trusting God. What's God doing for you now? But now watch what else they said. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now if he will have him. God said, this is my only begotten Son. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. And they're down there at the foot of the cross saying, well, if you'll have him, as though God wouldn't have him. He said, I'm the Son of God. And then the thieves also, which were crucified him, cast the same in his teeth. Now that's not a very nice expression, isn't it? One of those thieves are later going to turn, but for a while, both of those things, they're saying the same thing, casting it in his teeth, as though just saying it to him in such a manner, just like you would hit someone in the mouth with these words. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, Lama Sabachthani. Now, they tell me that is Aramaic, which is very much like the Hebrew. And that is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, those are the opening words of the 22nd Psalm. And I'm not going to speculate too deeply into the meaning and significance of those words, because it's not told here. I've heard some things that people have said about that, and you may have too. But I do want to read to you from this psalm. This is a poetic description of the agony Jesus endured on the cross, told by David hundreds of years, 1,000 years before Jesus was on that cross. And Jesus, by quoting the opening of that psalm, to those who will listen, they can come to an understand of what Jesus endured from the words of this psalm. Now, it's not exact, it's poetic language, okay? But there's so many things here that will remind you of that cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou heardest not, and in the night season I am not silent, but thou art holy, thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee, they trusted, thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee and were delivered, they trusted in thee and were not confounded. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people. They that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord that He would deliver him. Let Him deliver him, saying He delighted in him. But thou art He that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was on my mother's breast. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped on me with their mouths as a ravening and as a roaring lion. I'm poured out like water. My bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue cleaveth to my jaws. Thou hast brought me to the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I may tell all my bones. They look and stare upon me. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. Be thou not far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my darling, from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth. For thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorns. Well, that would be the horns of some wild beast impaled on those horns like he's hanging on that cross. Now, he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And we know what that means because Matthew tells us. But they didn't understand what he said. Some of them that stood there when they heard this said, this man calleth for Elias. You see, it must have been on their minds. They knew what the prophet said, that Elias must first come. They must have been thinking about these things. Some of them said, this man calleth for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a spurge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. Now, well, perhaps this is right, that he couldn't speak plainly. Now, his mouth dried up like a potsherd, and trying to say, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, he may have could hardly have said it. And so they didn't hear and understand what he said and thought, he calleth for Elijah. And so somebody says, well, I'll give him that vinegar and moisten his lips, and maybe he can speak more plainly. But look what others said. The rest, this is what gets me. The rest said, let it be. Let it be. Don't do that. Let's see whether Elias will come and save him. And then Jesus cried. He cried out with a loud voice and yielded up the ghost. Is that when he said, it is finished? Or is that when he said, into thy hands I commend my spirit? We read one from John and one from Luke. He said both of those things. One of those were his very last words. And his spirit departed. George Herbert's one of my favorite poets. He's kind of a lyrical poetry that he wrote. He was a country parson. And he wrote some beautiful poetry, and most of it's religious poetry. He wrote a poem called The Sacrifice. And in this poem, he captured the emotional agony of Christ. It's a long, long, long poem. I've just pulled out 4 stanzas to give the impression of what he writes. O all ye who pass by, whose eyes and mind to worldly things are sharp, but to me blind, to me who took eyes that I might find you, was ever grief like mine? Shame tears my soul, my body many a wound. Sharp nails pierce this, but sharper that confound reproaches which are free while I am bound. Was ever grief like mine? But, oh my God, why leavest thou me, the Son in whom thou dost delight to be? My God, was ever grief like mine? But now I die. Now all is finished. My woe, man's will. And now I bow my head. Only let others say when I am dead, never was grief like mine. Have you ever suffered emotionally? I want you to know your Lord has too. And He knows when you do. He knows how it feels. He suffered emotionally for you. Now there's 2 more passages, and I'll extend the invitation. One of them found in Hebrews 12 in verse 2. He endured the cross, despising the shame. And I'm not talking about the pain here. Matthew emphasizes the shame, despising the shame. But the second is some words Jesus said on the cross that we find in Luke 23:34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. See, they didn't know what they were doing. Peter would later say if they had known, they would not have crucified the Son of God. They didn't know what they were doing. And so they sat down and watched this. And we are aghast that they could sit and watch such a thing as this. But they didn't know what they were doing. But we do know, don't we? We know what he was doing up there. And we look to ourselves and we know why he was there, because we know who we are. And we needed this. And so, who's the worse? Is it those that sat there watching that didn't know? Or is it us that do know? And walk away from him. And so here's the invitation. Let this touch your heart. Let it open your heart to the gospel. We know. We see what he's done. Don't walk away from this. Come to the foot of that cross. Say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. I want to be baptized in his name. Have my sins washed away. And I'll live for him, faithful forever. If you'll respond to that invitation, do it as we stand and sing.